think everybody had that one childhood game that they obsessed over. The game that you would daydream about at school and make doodles of in the margins of your notebooks. Well, for me, that was Turok Dinosaur Hunter on the N64. I don't think I can adequately put into words just how important Turok is to my childhood. The setting, the music, the carnage. Far Cry Blood Dragon, eat your heart out. Turok did the bionic dinosaur with laser eyes all the way back in 1997. This game came out at the apex of the dinosaur hype of the 1990s. Get it? Apex? And to people unfamiliar with the series, it's easy to look at the box art and the screenshots and, well, the title, and assume the entire game revolves around shooting raptors and T-Rexes in a prehistoric jungle. But that's actually pretty far from the truth. And in my personal opinion, that's the series' biggest strength, its enemy variety. Dinosaurs do feature prominently in the first couple levels alongside human foes, and then it slowly transitions to some more Jurassic wildlife like, mutant apes, giant beetles, and man-eating plants. But then after level 3, it completely goes off the fucking rails, pitting you against voodoo fire priests, cyborgs, mechs, mantis aliens with jetpacks and laser guns, and just straight up fucking demons. Even the dinosaurs in the later levels up the crazy to 11 when they start strapping Gatling guns onto their backs. The whole thing is very reminiscent of being a kid and playing with whatever you had in your toy box. G.I. Joe versus Jurassic Park action figures versus a big Hot Wheels truck versus a dollar store robot toy. Well, maybe I only made that connection because I was still playing with toys when this game came out, but still. And man, does it only get wilder in the sequels. But before we deep dive into the Turok trilogy, I just want to take a step back and say, hey, what's up? I'm Zach, and I like getting all of the achievements in old, weird, or obscure games. Turok definitely fits the old category, though I'm of course playing the recent Night Dive remasters with achievement support. Originally, I wanted this video to cover the entire trilogy, but it turns out I have a lot to say about each of these games. The script kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so I'm splitting it into 3 videos. So let's begin with 1997's Turok Dinosaur Hunter. For some context, at the time that Turok came out, there were only 10 games released on the N64 in North America, and none of them were first-person shooters. Yes, that means that Turok actually predates the legendary GoldenEye 64 by a full 5 months, and probably could have stolen all of the glory away from GoldenEye if it only had multiplayer. A problem that they would be eager to correct in the sequels. But still, Turok is a bit of an unsung trailblazer for console shooters. The game's a technical marvel too. Despite being practically a launch title for the N64, it still managed to pull off real-time lighting, particle effects, and motion capture. 3 things which, wow, we definitely take for granted nowadays, but they were really cutting edge at the time. Reading any contemporary articles about the games, critics overwhelmingly praised how impressive the game was visually, which is pretty fucking hilarious in hindsight looking at this footage. And on top of that, whereas most 90s FPSs were more or less 2.5D corridor shooters, Turok had these large open outdoor levels with true 3D gunplay. And true 3D gunplay was pretty novel at the time too. Remember, Quake was less than a year old when Turok came out. But this was all not without cost. Turok had that infamous PS1 and 64 era fog to mask the low draw distance. The fog is still very much there in the remaster, but it's dialed back a decent chunk. Why not just remove the fog completely in the remaster, you ask? Well, it's easier just to show you by turning off the fog in console commands. Yeah. There are certain sections where you need to do like a leap of faith to jump down onto platforms below you, platforms that in the original game you couldn't even see. The only hint that there's anything to land on at all was the top of a tree that would peek through the fog. But now in the remaster, you can actually see what you're jumping to, which that's a nice improvement. Now, there's an argument when games like these are remastered whether the fog is an integral part of the game's aesthetic or vibe, and whether removing it permanently alters the tone. And I do think there's merit to that. I remember being pretty vividly immersed in the jungles of Turok with this thick, humid mist surrounding me, obscuring whatever beast and creature hides just beyond it. In fact, playing the Night Dive remaster for the first time back in 2017 without the fog, it was kind of a revelation for me. See, originally, as a 5-year-old who could barely hold a controller, I played this game almost like a survival horror title. I moved slowly through the fog, and I distinctly remember the ambient jungle sounds stressing me out because I didn't know if those growls were like a raptor about to jump out at me or just tone-setting sound effects. It would take me hours to creep through these levels, which made it all the more stressful since enemies actually respawned behind you after a set period of time. It was honestly kind of an anxiety-inducing experience. Part of it was probably that I was a child and just shit at games in general, and part of it was also, of course, playing a shooter on an N64 controller. That was always kind of ass. So imagine my surprise playing this game again in 2017, remastered without the oppressive fog, and realizing this is a fucking boomer shooter. Which, like, yeah, obviously it's a boomer shooter in the literal sense of the term, but I was not playing this at all the way it was intended, strafing full speed and hopping around, never letting go of the trigger since there's no reloading. I didn't realize how much this was just a Quake-style, fast-paced shooter. Between the fog and the controls and, of course, my dumb child brain, I was playing at the completely wrong pace back in the day. I went from fearing what was 10 yards in front of me to zipping through these levels, blasting everything that moves. Isn't it funny how you can revisit a childhood favorite and realize you've been playing it wrong the entire time? So yeah, I actually think limiting the fog was the right move. You still maintain some of the ambiance that it brings, while accentuating the fast-paced gameplay style that Turok was always supposed to have. When you first boot the game, instead of just a splash screen with the developer's logo, we're treated to a little Scooby-Doo style animation of Iguana Entertainment's mascot being assaulted. I don't know how else to put it.
Gulp.
This is a fun little touch of personality from the studio, but it also becomes a running gag for Turok games as each new game escalates the violence towards the iguana. It's sort of like the evolution of the Neversoft openings in the old Tony Hawk games. As far as plot goes, Turok 1 is very story light. You hit start game and there's a short intro movie saying, there's a hub area with portals to each level, you unlock those levels with keys, so find the keys. And also find the hub area too, because why not, fuck you. And then it just drops you in. It's a classic boomer shooter setup. I don't know where I am or who I am, I just know that I must kill. And it's for that reason that the very first thing I did was instinctively try to stab this monkey to death. Alright, here we go, first real enemy. Boom! Oh yeah, that one's going in the montage.
And saying, yeah, the planet is dying, the government hates us, the animals are leaving, the aliens aren't contacting us, we might be alone, it just might be you and me, but that's okay, because you really need anyone else.
I love these character models too, by the way. Just like GoldenEye, it's pretty clearly just a texture of one of the devs making a goofy face that they painted onto the model. Right behind him is our first key, so we get to see that sick mocap technology. Playing this game before I could, actually read, I always thought these keys were some sort of chalice or goblet or something, and that's why Turok looks like he's trying to pour them into his mouth. But hold on, let's back up a second. If you're unfamiliar with Turok as a franchise, you're probably wondering, why is this Native American man killing jacked dudes with battle axes in the middle of these jungle ruins? Well, the honest answer is because it's fucking cool. Turok lives and dies by the rule of cool, and takes itself seriously the entire time, which is precisely why it rules. There is actual lore, but it's, oh god. Alright, you know that lore versus lore meme with the Gautier song and the trippy montage of, ancient aliens and shit? Turok lore is, literally that. And I don't mean literally in the millennial sense of the word, I mean literal, reality-bending ancient aliens are at the center of Turok's lore. I'll get into that later with Turok 2 and 3, as those games actually have, a story. But for some background, let's go over a very brief history of the franchise. Turok is actually much older than most people realize, with his inception going all the way back to 1954 with the Turok Son of Stone comics. Yes, that means Turok debuted while Elvis Presley was topping the charts and the UK was still rationing meat sales from the food shortages caused by World War II. Obviously, 1950s Turok is much different than 1990s Turok, but essentially it was about a Native American man named Turok who accidentally ended up stuck in an isolated valley in the depths of the American wilderness, where dinosaurs never went extinct. So there's no aliens, demons, or cyborgs, just a native surviving against raptors, pterodactyls, and T-Rexes. This comic ran until 1982, before Valiant Comics eventually acquired the IP. The comic scene in the 1980s and 90s was kind of going through its edgy teenage phase, where a lot of existing comic lines were reworked and rebooted to be mature and dark and violent, eschewing the pulpy kid stuff from the previous decades. Which is exactly why in 1992, Valiant Comics rebooted Turok into the brutal dimension-hopping warrior that we all know and love. Then Acclaim Entertainment would come along and eventually buy out Valiant and absorb Turok into their brand catalog. They would then use their own game studio, Iguana Entertainment, to synergize by releasing new Turok comics alongside a brand new Turok game for the upcoming Nintendo 64. So, while there was a comic line to tie in with the games, the game itself didn't really do a good job of telling its story. Actually, even that's being generous. The game didn't even try to tell you its story. I'll get into details later, but to sum it up for Turok 1, you're in a place called the Lost Land, which is this interdimensional pocket that has sucked in matter from all different kinds of times and places. So you have 65 million year old dinosaurs living in here alongside aliens from another galaxy, living alongside highly advanced androids, living alongside humans from both the far future and the distant past. Genuinely, anything from any time and anywhere can exist contemporaneously in the Lost Land. As for our protagonist, Turok is actually just a title that belongs to a lineage of Native Americans who defend Earth from the perils that spill out of the Lost Land. And in this case, there is an evil warlord named the Campaigner who wants to break out of the Lost Land and conquer the universe. But in order to leave this world, he must assemble an artifact called the Chronoscepter, which has been shattered into 8 pieces and hidden all over the Lost Land. So it's up to Tal Set, who is the current Turok, to stop him. Now, despite that setup, we don't actually need to collect 8 pieces of the Chronoscepter to beat the game. Well, we do for the achievement, but I just mean that you can beat the game by playing through each level and killing the Campaigner at the end. You don't need to collect the Chronoscepter pieces. Speaking of achievements, let's talk about them. Outside of the unmissable achievements, there are only 2 collectible achievements, one for getting all 8 pieces of the Chronoscepter, and one for finding all of the secret areas. And then there's a handful of miscellaneous achievements. For example, there's actually an easy achievement to get right here in the beginning of the game. So, just like most boomer shooters, your health is soft capped at 100, with the only way of going above 100 being collecting the smallest health pickups, which raise your health by 2. But there's a sort of hidden mechanic where killing human enemies with a knife or a bow gives a small chance of them dropping an item called a Mortal Wound, which increases your HP's soft cap by 5 points. At least until you die and respawn, then it gets reset. I guess the idea is to tie in Turok's heritage by incentivizing the use of, quote-unquote, traditional native weapons, even though the knife looks like a modern combat knife. But presumably this is also why the drops themselves are indigenous ceremonial masks. There's a few other ways that the games tie in Native American culture and spiritualism, but it's all fairly surface level for the most part. I should note that these Mortal Wound items only drop in easy or normal difficulty, but thankfully there's no difficulty-specific achievement, so you never even have to touch hard mode. For this achievement, you only need to collect 4 of these Mortal Wounds to bring your base HP up to 120. Like I said, this is easiest done in the early game when human enemies are still pretty weak. Another achievement you can get is for completing the training tutorial, which is no big deal. But then there's an achievement for completing the training tutorial in under 2 minutes and 45 seconds. This is probably the only actually difficult achievement in the game. It gave me flashbacks to FNG in COD 4.
Flashbang through the door!
So strap on your speedrunning boots and go at it again and again and keep shaving your time down by seconds until you finally nail it. Because this is a very 90s FPS, of course, there are secrets galore, and an achievement for finding all of them. And believe me, you are not finding these on your own. Just like most boomer shooters, most of the secrets are false walls that are indistinguishable from real ones. Like, you basically need to hug every single wall in the game to find these naturally. These are also not tracked in-game, so you actually need to follow a guide and be 100% sure that you hit them all, because unfortunately, if you miss one, like I did, there's no way to tell which one it was, so you functionally have to play through the entire game again, hitting up every secret area along the way. All of that also applies to the Chronoceptor pieces. But back to the game. Making our way through the first level, I really forgot how much platforming there is in this game. It's all pretty easy, but I remember this being a nightmare with an N64 controller. Now, don't get me wrong, I do love the N64 controller, and I'll defend it in most cases, but when it comes to FPSs, I'm sorry, there's not much to defend. We just didn't know any better back then. There wasn't a standard set for console FPS controls yet. We fight our first Perlin here, which are these knuckle-dragging gorilla lizard hybrid creatures that are so massive even their death animations can hurt you. We'll actually get a whole level devoted to these guys in Turok 2, which kind of fleshes out their species, so that's pretty neat. Still in level 1 though, we eventually find ourselves up against a swarm of giant beetles. Now this lends a perfect opportunity to use your knife for the Swift and Deadly achievement, which is to kill 3 enemies with a single knife swing. But I already got this back in 2017, so let's just pretend it pops here. There's some underwater sections here too, which I just want to take a second to say how much I love the soundtrack of this game. I unfortunately can't really play any of it for you though. I tried using a track from Turok 1 on my Far Cry video, and whoever owns the rights to that soundtrack is really getting their money's worth from copyright strikes, let me tell you. God, the underwater theme specifically is just so good. Fun fact, it's actually sampled on the iconic Macintosh Plus album, Floral Shop. Even if you don't like Vaporwave or know who Macintosh Plus is, you probably recognize that album cover. You know what I'm talking about. It's been memed to death. Level 2 is more of the same, jungles, caves, and whatnot, but level 3 is where things start to get weird. Instead of lush, natural landscapes, suddenly there's this monolithic stone fortress whose defenders look like Baron Samedi. They have skeletons painted on their skin and attack you with bone clubs and blow darts, and some of them even cast fireballs at you. I think the lore implication here is that these are some of the earliest humans to have been pulled into the Lost Land, as they're actually called Ancient Warriors in the manual. So I guess this is some sort of Stone Age warrior tribe whose stay in the Lost Land has evolved them into this voodoo-style death cult. At least that's my headcanon. At the end of level 3, we fight our first boss, an elite mercenary called the Long Hunter. For some reason, I always assumed this guy was Australian. I guess maybe he reminded me of like Crocodile Dundee, but this random guy on the Turok wiki from 11 years ago had the same thought, so maybe it's not just me. We have to fight his Humvee buddy here first, and let me tell you, it's an exhilarating boss fight. And just like the iconic gargoyles in Dark Souls, just when you think it's over, which leads to another exhilarating boss fight. After the second Humvee, the Long Hunter finally comes out to face you himself, and unfortunately I'm now out of ammo. So thankfully, ammo and health pickups spawn on the edges of the arena indefinitely, so after some wild serpentining and strafing, I got back in the fight. Oh hey, he throws like boomerangs too. This guy's definitely Australian, right? You know, the Lost Lands are pretty close to how I picture Australia and its wildlife, so it kinda makes sense he feels at home here. Killing the Long Hunter, we do a little Turok dance for an audience of 2 wrecked Humvees and a dead Aussie, and then pick up Crocodile Dundee's pulse rifle, which is a dope power weapon, one of my favorite in the game, but it unfortunately bleeds ammo pretty fast. In level 4, we traverse deeper into the ancient ruins that are protected by those Stone Age tribal warriors, and we go on a little mini Indiana Jones adventure. We cross old dilapidated bridges, avoid ominous traps, solve puzzles, and explore Cyclopean pyramids, constructed well before written history. I guess also after written history. And during it, because time has no meaning here, but you get the point. All in the name of plundering our supernatural treasure. Except instead of doing something cool like melting Nazi faces, our treasure just opens up the portal to the next level. Which is unfortunate because level 5 is indisputably the worst level in the game. I dig it aesthetically, don't get me wrong. The entire level is in this labyrinthian series of catacombs filled with traps and ambushes and this strange, thick, boiling black liquid. I think I liked this level so much as a kid because it reminded me of The Mummy, down to like the scarab beetles and the scary pitch black goo. But I certainly never beat this level as a kid, because it is an absolute goddamn maze. Even with the map, this level is a nightmare to traverse. The number of different textures in general in Turok is pretty limited, and so you could arguably say that, quote, everything looks the same for, I don't know, just about any level. But in this level specifically, it is really bad. Like I mentioned before too, one of Turok's defining features that set it apart from other contemporary FPSs were that the levels were large open arenas. Level 5 is anything but. It's cramped and claustrophobic, which, to be fair, could be a nice change of pace, but the layout of the level is just so confusing. Like legitimately, half of my footage of this level has the map overlay obscuring the screen because I have no clue where I'm going. It just ain't it, Chief. See, that line actually works on multiple levels because I could be referring to like a Native American tribal chief. We get to our next boss at the end of this level, which almost makes up for how doo-doo the map layout was, because here we go up against a giant acid-vomiting praying mantis. The boss fight starts out normal with the typical strafing and mag dumping, but then this guy starts freaking out and knocking down walls, which expands the arena. And if that wasn't a cool enough mechanic to mix things up, he'll also start crawling on the ceiling too. Killing him, we once again do our little Turok jig and move on to the next level. Level 6 brings us back to the jungle, but instead of being on the jungle floor, we're clearing out a network of tree houses up in the canopy of the jungle. This is also where we'll start encountering mantids. These are high-tech, humanoid insect aliens who have found their way into the Lost Land. There's no in-game justification for why they're here in the Lost Land or why they're hostile. Well, there is, but not until Turok 2, because just like the Perlin, these guys also have an entire level devoted to them in the sequel. But in Turok 1, they just kinda add to, for lack of a better term, the alien environment that is the Lost Land. Are these explorers who are stuck in this weird pocket dimension, or are they raiders here to loot resources? Or are they warriors loyal to the campaigner? Who knows? But it's so goddamn cool that I went from fighting tribal voodoo priests to insect aliens in the span of 15 minutes. This game rules. These guys have jetpacks and laser weaponry that can really eat your health if you're not careful. We're gonna see a lot of these guys in the last level of the game. A detail I really like about this level is that to convey the scale of just how high up you are in the canopy, sometimes you'll turn around and just be like eye level with a giant Brachiosaurus who's just chilling and going about their day looking for leaves to eat. Very cool. Finally, we get to the penultimate level, level 7, the Lost Land. Which, I mean, we've been in the Lost Land this entire time, right? So I'm not sure why this level is just called the Lost Land, but whatever. This is the level I remember replaying the most as a kid, just because it's so bonkers. You start in these caverns, being harassed by a bunch of beetles, a pretty stock standard opener, but then you encounter these guys who are apparently demons? These guys are little green ghouls who shoot ki blasts out of their hand, and you know, I could at least theorize what the mantis aliens are doing in the Lost Lands, especially given how much sci-fi alien stuff there is in the greater lore, but like, what's the deal with these guys? God, I sound like fucking Jerry Seinfeld. What's the deal with demons in the Lost Land? Was that even close to Jerry Seinfeld? I feel like I keep doing voices and impressions in these videos and they just are complete dog shit. To my knowledge, they aren't found in any of the comic books or even in the other games. So, I don't know, maybe they were intended to be servants of Oblivion? Which, I'll get to Oblivion in Turok 3, but just know that it's sort of the final antagonist that looms over the trilogy. It's possible that they were going to tie in Oblivion to this game before scrapping it for time constraints. I don't know. Not sure. Just seems like a pretty out-of-pocket enemy type. I mean, they're cool, don't get me wrong, but Demons? Really? Like, what's the lore? Maybe they're pulling like a Piccolo from Dragon Ball and these guys are just called demons, but you actually end up finding out that they're actually an alien from another planet. And they're also green too, so I don't know, that theory holds water, right? Anyway, you emerge from the caverns into this dusty, arid landscape, tinged with orange and brown. It's a complete contrast to the lively, misty jungles of the previous levels. This is an ancient, primordial land, a dusty graveyard with pools of molten rock peppered throughout. I know it probably doesn't look like much by today's standards, but there was something really foreboding about this level, coupled with the soundtrack that is now at double the tempo that it previously was. It's a really effective way of building towards that final showdown with the campaigner. You go through the gauntlet of endgame enemies like mantids and demons, and even a few guys riding triceratops with rocket launchers strapped to their backs, and you do some tense lava platforming before finally arriving at the entrance of a massive fortress. Fighting our way inside, we get our first taste of the hulking mechs that protect the stronghold. And I guess it's worth mentioning here a little bit of lore about our antagonist, because apparently there's some history between him and Tau Set, who is our current Turok. Prior to the events of the game, the campaigner attempted to kill Turok and take from him this magical artifact called the Light Burden. The Light Burden is this thing that looks like a simple, unassuming leather satchel, but actually... Okay, get ready for this. It actually contains a fragment of the Big Bang. What does that mean exactly? It's kind of left nebulous, which I think is by design, because the Light Burden sort of acts as a bag of holding in D&D. Turok can pull a number of magic-imbued items from it at any given time, from a stone that allows him to see portals between worlds, to special armor that can deflect almost any blow, to, well, his entire arsenal of weapons. Yeah, it's basically the in-game justification for why you can hold all of those massive guns at once. Which is also why the 2008 Turok could only hold 2 weapons at a time, because he didn't have the Light Burden, and not at all because they were just chasing popular trends at the time and completely abandoning the gameplay tenets of the original trilogy. Right? That's why, right? Sorry. Anyway, the Light Burden seems to be a sort of Deus Ex Machina item. It's used as a plot device later on too, but it's basically just Batman's utility belt, but for Turok. Whatever he needs for any given situation tends to be conveniently stored in the Light Burden. So the campaigner tried to steal it from Tau Set and got his shit pushed in so hard that almost his entire body needed to be rebuilt with synthetic organs and prosthetic limbs. So despite looking like a beefed up juice cake, what'd I just say? So despite looking like a juiced up beefcake, he's actually all metal and wires underneath that skin, which also plays into why in the final level most of the enemies are now mechs and cyborgs. Apparently in the comics, the campaigner was a full-on cyborg and was sort of like a unifying general who conquered the Lost Land and brought all of the different denizens under his command. You know, hence the name, campaigner. Again, I want to stress how none of this is explained in the game or even in the manual. The whole bit about them fighting over the Light Burden, that came from the manual for Turok Rage Wars, which was a spin-off game that came out 2 years later and technically isn't even canon. But like, does canon even fucking matter in this series? I don't know. So after level 7, definitely make a save back here at the hub, because if you're following guides for the secret areas and the Chronoceptor pieces, there's no turning back after level 8. So if the achievement doesn't pop when you get to the last secret area in level 8, you missed one somewhere, and you're gonna have to enjoy your next hour backtracking to find it. The final level takes place in the campaigner's futuristic mechanical fortress, and it really highlights just how fucking cool the Lost Land is as a setting. You have this primordial ancient land inhabited by Stone Age warriors and dinosaurs, juxtaposed with a massive high-tech fortress filled with sci-fi machinery and cyborgs. The campaigner being the personification of this dichotomy, giving the impression of a Bronze Age warrior straight out of like Conan the Barbarian, despite being essentially an android himself underneath all that synthetic skin. God, this setting had so much potential. The penultimate boss at the end of level 8 is the campaigner's personal pet T-Rex, named Thunder. Did you really think we were going to get through a game called Dinosaur Hunter without fighting a T-Rex? If you're like me and saved all of your power weapon ammo, this fight's pretty simple. I dumped pretty much all of my power weapon ammo here because not only do we get a restock right after this, but we also get our 8th and final Chronoscepter piece. Now, despite this thing looking like a dinky little fan with bent spokes, it's, well, you'll see in a second. The lead up to the campaigner fight is forever carved into my memory. There's no enemies after defeating Thunder, just this ominous walk through these dark blue-tinged hallways as they load you up with ammo and armor, which is always a bad sign. Then you follow this path lined with skulls as the dangling corpses of men quietly sway back and forth while still dripping blood. This scene was simultaneously terrifying and awesome for 5-year-old Zach. I'm pretty sure I drew a picture of it for a kindergarten assignment, and for some reason the teacher was not concerned at all in the slightest. It was really a different time. And now for the final boss, the final showdown with the campaigner. Yeah, so if you're not playing this game for achievements and didn't collect all of the Chronoscepter pieces, this boss fight is actually really tough. The campaigner is like fighting a fucking Dragon Ball Z character. He teleports all over the place and smacks you around like a cop's wife. He's a really great final boss, just challenging enough to get you to fully lock in without being infuriating. There's also a cool system in place where his character model gets visibly more damaged the more you whittle down his health, revealing more and more of his cybernetic skeleton. It's a beautiful touch. Chef's kiss. And with him defeated, we do a sick Tom Cruise action run away from an exploding fortress and roll credits. But is that really the end of the campaigner? Well, yeah, this one anyway. Because in the comics, the campaigner is just a title. It's a mantle to be claimed by only the most ambitious warlords of the Lost Land. It's sort of like an evil mirrored version of the Turok lineage. In the comics, the second campaigner that they face is actually a Confederate soldier from the Civil War. He was captured by the Union and kept in this brutal prison camp where he was forced to fight his fellow prisoners just to survive. Tau Set just happened to have a minor scuffle in the prison camp, fighting back an incursion from the Lost Land, but in the chaos of that battle, this POW escaped through a portal to the Lost Land where he ended up becoming this. Which, I'm sorry, this design fucking rules. Bro's getting face-fucked by a ladybug and still manages to make it look badass. He's got wings made from tattered flags and is just covered in insects. And fun fact, one of his creators is actually Fabian Nicieza. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but he's one of the co-creators of Deadpool. So, how does Turok defeat such a formidable foe? By challenging him to a batting contest. Yeah. This version of the campaigner is introduced in a more or less joke issue called Spring Break in the Lost Land, starring Joshua Fireseed as the current Turok, instead of our boy Tau Set. Joshua is a college student, so his comics have more of a lighthearted Peter Parker Spider-Man style story where he has to balance saving the multiverse with chatting up sorority girls and passing Calc 2. It's pretty tonally different from the games, that's for sure. As far as the second campaigner goes, he's more or less gone from the story after this too, though they do use his design in one of the Game Boy games. But that being said, the concept of a 19th century US soldier becoming a Lost Land warlord actually does get recycled in Turok Evolution in 2002, which maybe I'll cover in the future. But anyway, that's it. That's Turok 1 complete. If it wasn't obvious from my fanboying, this was the game that I played the most out of the trilogy, and maybe even my most played game on the N64. I have have distinct memories of my dad laughing at me because I couldn't remember our 7-digit phone number, but I could remember the 16-character master cheat for this game, which I'm going to recite right now from memory, NTHGTHDGDCRTDTRK. I memorized it in like 3-character chunks all those years ago, and it wasn't until I was like 25 that I learned that it's just, on the 8th day, God created Turok, without any vowels. That would have been so much easier to remember, but like I could also barely read back then, so I don't think I knew what a vowel was. I don't know. God, I wish I could dredge up the hundreds of doodles and comics that I drew as a kid inspired by Turok. But suffice to say, this game will always hold a special place in my heart. It introduced me to something that I was far too young for, but it's now something that I actively seek out in almost any game that I play. Gore. My parents never really put a restriction on violent games, so I played my fair share of them growing up, but Turok 1's death animations and the blood effects were, they were unlike anything else at the time. Over-the-top violence and gore is integral to Turok's identity, and the only reason I bring it up is because it highlights how much the franchise lost its way post-Turok Evolution.
Look how they massacred my boy.
But I'll talk more on the future of the series after we finish up with Turok 3. Some kids grew up with Sonic, some kids grew up with Kingdom Hearts. Me? I grew up with a Native American man that drills holes into people's skulls and showers them with viscera and gray matter. I grew up with Turok. Like I said at the top of the video, this will be part 1 of 3, Turok 2's up next, and then we'll round it out with Turok 3 Shadows of Oblivion. So, I'll see you there.